Hey guys, Sarah with ExtremeTerrain.com, and today we have a review and install of the Teraflex 2.5-inch base lift kit with 9550 VSS Shocks, fitting your 18 and up Jeep Wrangler JLs. This is a suspension lift of 2.5 inches, giving your Jeep more ground clearance. Teraflex notes that this kit will accommodate up to 35-inch tires. All right, so just for fun, we had some 37s laying around. We figured we'd throw them on the Jeep and see if they do clear. And they actually do, just barely. But keep in mind, we are on the flat shop floor here. If you take these on the road or any other terrain, they're definitely going to hit. So I will say the Teraflex is spot on, saying 35s are probably your max tire that you can get on here. This kit includes everything you need for install, including shocks, springs, sway bar end links, and bump stop extensions. Coming in at around $970, this kit is the most budget-friendly option out there that comes with shocks and springs. I'm giving this install a 3 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. It can be done in approximately 4 hours. It is a fairly involved install and you will need a professional alignment afterwards. All right, with that said, let's hop right into our install. For this install, you will need 3/8 ratchets, a socket set ranging from 13 to 21 millimeter, an 8mm and 6mm Allen socket, a wrench set from 14 to 21mm, the included angled wrench, 2 vice grips. Some optional but helpful tools include cutters, pliers, a pop clip removal tool, impact drivers, swivel sockets, extensions, and a pry bar. All right, so we have our Jeep in the air, we have the wheels off of it, and we've supported our axle with pole jacks. Now the first step in our install is to get your 8mm wrench and take off the bolt at the back of our sway bar end link. Now if this does spin on you, you can put an Allen key in the end of the bolt here. That is a 6mm, but ours seems to be coming off, so we will not need that on this side. For the bottom bolt, you will need a 18mm socket and an 18mm wrench. We can use an impact gun for the passenger side because there is a little bit more room. So grab your 18mm socket and zip this nut off. With our 18mm ratcheting wrench, we're going to remove the bottom bolt. There's not a ton of room, but there is a flag nut on the back side of this to help with removal. Now that our bolt is broken loose, it'll be a little bit easier to get it the rest of the way out with the ratchet. Using a 21mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt holding the sway bar in from the frame. There is a flag nut on the back of this, so we only need to get a socket on one side. You might need to get in with a ratcheting wrench or a wrench to get this the rest of the way off, just because our bar is kind of in the way of getting a socket on it. There we go. Next up, we're going to remove and discard this brake line bracket. But before we do that, I'm going to remove the ABS sensor out of these 2 clips just to get a little more clearance and get it out of the way just in case. We do have to pry on this, so we don't want to catch it accidentally. Next up, we're going to grab our pry bar and get it underneath the lip of this brake line bracket, and we're going to twist this. Once you have the opening pried enough, get your pry bar all the way in there. It might be helpful to put a second one right here as a better pry point because this bracket is pretty bendable. But once you have it in there, you should be able to pry it open. It might take a couple tries, a little bit of finagling. It also might be helpful to use a set of pliers or channel locks just to get that last little bit. And our brake line is free. Now with our brake line free, we can remove this bracket using a 15mm socket. We're now going to repeat that process on the other side, prying back on your bracket, removing your brake line, and with our 15mm socket, removing the bracket. For our next step, we're going to be removing the connector at the back of the front axle, as well as the wiring harness clips that hold it in. You're going to need a flathead screwdriver for this. Using your flathead screwdriver, gently pry back on the white plastic clip, press down, and pull back on our connector. With our connector free, remove the two clips holding in the wiring harness. Once both clips are removed, we're going to head over to the other side and disconnect the breather. Using a set of pliers, grab the metal clip and wiggle the breather loose. Using our 18mm socket and wrench, remove the bolt at the bottom of our shock. Using an 18mm wrench, remove the top bolt on our shock. Now repeat that process on the other side. With our shocks out on both sides, we can now lower the jacks holding our axle and remove our spring. Lowering the other side of our axle, we can now remove our passenger spring. We can now install our new springs. A helpful tip is if you don't want to fight the bump stops on the bottom, just zip tie them in for now, and then we can cut the zip tie later. If you use the zip tie, cut and remove it at this point. Using the tool provided, place the nut in the top part of it. We're going to thread the bolt down through the center, and then the nut is going to go on in the bottom here. With our tool in place on the nut on the bottom of our bump stop, get your 6mm Allen key socket and tighten down this bolt. Now we can repeat that process on the passenger side. We can now insert our bolt through the top of our bump stops. And I'm going to use our tool to put the nut on through the shock mount, just because it seems like there's a little bit more room than the other side. All right, now it is time to install our shocks. It is important to note that this is a twin tube shock, so it must be installed with the body facing down. It does note it on the bottom of the shock, so you want to install it in this configuration. You also want to put the spacer on the back part of this eyelet up top, so it installs like this in our bracket. With your 18mm ratchet, get this tightened down. With the bottom of our shock lined up, get your bolt all the way through and get the nut on the other side. With your 18mm socket and wrench, tighten down this bolt. All right, with our driver's side shock installed, go ahead and repeat that process on the passenger side, and then we're gonna hop to end links. Installing our end link in this configuration on the outside of the sway bar and the inside of the bracket on the bottom. Grab your provided 19mm nut and get it installed. At this point, I'm going to pull the sway bar down so we can get a socket on the top nut here. Once you do that, you can push it back into place and get your bottom bolt installed. Grabbing our 19mm socket, tighten down your top nut. Push your sway bar and end link back into place. And install your bottom bolt using the factory hardware. Using your 18mm socket and wrench, tighten down the bottom bolt on the end link. With our driver's side end link installed, repeat that process on the passenger side. With our end links in place, reconnect the connector at the back of the axle. Make sure you're pushing in on the white tab. Reconnect the breather to the back of your axle. All right, so we threw our wheels back on our Jeep and we have it on the ground. This is because it's going to be a lot easier to line up the bolt in your track bar with the Jeep on the ground, the weight on the suspension, and the ability to use your steering back and forth to line up your bolt hole. Let's get started. All right, you may need the help of a friend at this point. You're just gonna put your steering wheel back and forth in order to line up the bolt with this corresponding bolt hole. With our bolt through, we can now put our flag nut on the back. With your bolt in place, get a 21mm socket and tighten it down. Now that we're at the back of the Jeep, the first step in our uninstall is to remove the parking brake bracket. This can be done with a 13mm, and you might want an extension because it's pretty far underneath your Jeep. At this point, we're gonna reroute your e-brake cables, and before you do this, you do wanna set your e-brake for this step. Once you've done that, grab a set of locking pliers, and we're gonna grab the e-brake line at the back of our rotor. We're going to need to disconnect the e-brake line here. Before we do that, we want to place our pliers on this eyelet, pressing against the backing plate. Make sure you don't grab this little rubber boot while you're doing that. Repeat that process on the other side. Once our e-brake is released, remove this from the eyelet. Now grab a set of needle nose pliers and clamp the other side of this brake line from the e-brake bracket. It may take multiple tries, but once you've clamped all 3 prongs, it should slip out. And repeat that process on the other side. Now it's time to reroute your e-brake lines. Rather than over the fuel lines and crossmember, we're gonna reroute them under the fuel lines and crossmember and put them back in the bracket on the axle. With our e-brake lines rerouted, tuck them back into the bracket on the axle and clip them in place. Finally, tuck the end of the e-brake line back into the eyelet. Repeat that process on the other side. With our e-brake cables back in place, release your vice grips. With our axles supported, we can now do the first step in our uninstall, which is to remove our end links. Grabbing our 18mm socket and wrench, let's remove the bottom bolt out of our end link. Repeat that process on the other side. Using our 13mm socket, we can now disconnect the brake line bracket at the back of the axle. Repeat that process on the other side. Next step is with our 21mm socket to disconnect this side of the track bar. Now we can disconnect the bottom bolt on our shock using an 18mm socket and wrench. So if the bolt's fighting you a little bit getting it out of the bottom of the shock, just raise up on your axle a tiny little bit Repeat those steps on the other side. For our next step, we need to remove the bolt at the top of our shock. To do that, you need to get behind this panel. If you like, you can remove it, but we are just gonna pull down up top here to expose our bolt. Using our 18mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt. Repeat that process on the other side. At this point, we can lower our axle and remove our springs. We have our driver's side shock here. Be sure that you're grabbing the correct one because they are not identical across the back. Once you do, grab the rubber isolator and get it seated on top. We can get it reinstalled on our Jeep. Grabbing our passenger side shock now with our rubber top seated on there. Get it installed in place. Now we can raise our axle up enough till the shock seats in place on both sides. With our springs in place, we can now install our shocks, starting with the top bolt. You will need to put a spacer on the back side of this eyelet here. I recommend getting that in place first and then getting your shock up. With our bolt in place, let's grab our 18mm socket and get this tightened down. Now we can get the bottom bolt into our shock. You may have to adjust the height of your axle a little bit to get this lined up. Okay, we want to repeat the process on the passenger side with the shock and the spacer behind it and get our bolt in place. With the bolt in place, get your 18mm socket and tighten it down. With our shock in place, get the bolt through the bottom, and then we're going to grab our 18mm socket and wrench and tighten it down. We can now install the plates for our bump stops. It is important to note that these two holes facing the outside of your Jeep will be empty. We're going to get a bolt in the inside two holes. Placing it on top of our factory bump stop. Ensure it lines up with the bracket and it's not far over like this. In the top here. Once you do that, grab your corresponding nut and get it on the bottom. Do the same thing for the bolt hole that's directly behind it. Grab your 6mm Allen key and 14mm wrench and get these tightened down. Now we're ready to install the rest of our bump stops here. We are using this configuration, which is the 2-inch spacer and then another 1/2-inch spacer here. This is for the Sport. If you do have a Rubicon, it will be different. I would refer to the spacer sheet to be sure you're having it in the right configuration. But once our spacer is ready, get it lined up on the top of our bump stop that we just installed. Now we can insert the bracket into the side of our bump stop like this. This is what our bolt threads into. So holding it from the other side, once it's all lined up, it should thread in fairly nicely. Now we can have our bolt in the other side. Let's get it started for now. With our 8mm Allen socket, we can tighten this side down. Make sure we tighten down the other side. We're going to repeat that process on the other side, again installing it so the open holes are facing out. Grab your 14mm wrench and 6mm Allen socket and tighten these down. Grabbing our bump stop spacers in the same configuration as the passenger side. Get them lined up on our bump stop. Insert the bracket. And at this point, get your bolt in the bottom and threaded. Grab your other bolt and get it installed on the other side. Grabbing your 8mm Allen socket, tighten this down. Also tighten down the other side. With our bump stops now installed, we can reinstall our brake line brackets. Line it back up so the tab goes in the hole underneath, and then thread your bolt back in the hole above it. Grab your 13mm socket and tighten this down. Repeat that step on the other side, ensuring that your tab is in the bottom hole, and thread your bolt in the upper hole. Grab your 13mm socket and tighten it down. Next up, we're going to install our new end links with our stud facing down. Using the provided 8mm hex bolt and the 19mm nut, install the top of your sway bar end link. Grab a 19mm wrench, an 8mm Allen socket, and tighten this down. Using our 19mm socket, tighten down the nut at the bottom of our end link. We're going to repeat that process on the driver's side with our end link in the same configuration. Using our 19mm socket, we're going to tighten down the bottom nut on our end link. Using our 18mm wrench and 18mm socket, we're going to tighten the bolt and nut on the top of our end link. We can now reconnect the bolt through our track bar here. You can do this on the ground, it might be a little easier that way, but while it's in the air, we're going to try with a pry bar to line up our hole and get our bolt in. You might want to grab a second set of hands at this point because it might be a little easier for two people than one. Using a 21mm socket, tighten this down. All right, so that is going to do it for the review and install of our Teraflex lift kit. Remember, for all things Jeep, keep it at ExtremeTerrain.com.